So I'm going to jump straight into this. And preparing for this event over the weekend, I had a really fascinating chat with our next guest, the director of the War Memorial, Matt Anderson. He reminded me, among other things, that during the Second World War, when Australia had a population of just 7 million people, 960,000 people, that's just under a million, enlisted in our armed forces. God forbid we ever have another one like that, but that's what total war looks like. The equivalent now would be 4 million people enlisting, and in the modern era, I have to say that seems inconceivable. Now, in World War II, my father, aged 16, he tried to enlist in the recruiting office in Manly. My grandfather, who you heard earlier, had fought on the Western Front. He got a call from the recruiting office and he jumped on the 132 bus down to the wharf, ran to the recruitment office and physically dragged his young son out of there. And his argument was, I've got my eldest son, Laurie, off fighting the Japanese in Papua New Guinea. My daughter, Gwen, she's just joined the WAFs, and he'd be damned if he was going to give his youngest son to another war when he'd fought a war along with 3 of his brothers. Now, Laurie, the young one, came home with an aura of a hero from the Second World War, and for his whole life, my father, living under Laurie's shadow, harboured some kind of guilt, I'm sure of it actually, that he hadn't served, hadn't been able to, that he'd been pulled out of that recruiting office. But one of the questions we've been exploring today, and we've been talking about a little bit in our last discussion, is whether the psychology of the nation is fundamentally different than it was back then. And when I was a kid, I came here to the War Memorial, and the most compelling exhibits to me were the dioramas. I don't know how many of you have seen them, but the incredible one of the Lone Pine attack in Gallipoli. It's so graphic, it's like a 3-dimensional still frozen frame of a savage battle. And the scene on the Western Front at Pozières, depicting 4 diggers in a shell hole, a blasted shell hole surrounded by the bodies of their mates. And I didn't realise that the great Charles Bean had actually had a huge role in making what he called these works of art happen. Anyway, if you were here earlier, you would have heard me talking about my grandfather's war record, etc., and he'd suffered from shell shock. So I imagined him, lying in that diorama as one of the bodies had just been blown up, cowering under German shell fire. And I have to say that I showed my grandfather's war records to a mate of mine at the ABC, and he was very moved, and he went off to find the records of his own grandfather, who it turned out had been a pilot for the Australian Flying Corps in the First World War in the Middle East. This was all very exciting for my mate's family until they found his granddad's multiple bouts of gonorrhea set out in plain English in his medical records. Anyway, but for the most part, these family records obviously created a deep sense of connection for people of my generation to the country's military history. But will that erode further as we move on from those total wars that engage so many of us, the children and grandchildren of the people who fought them? So 1 in 3 of today's Australians were born in other countries, and true, some of them were refugees. They came from their own wars, and some of those wars are represented in the gallery here at the War Memorial. But the question remains, what would our nation's response be to a major war today? It's a question the people of Ukraine had to ask themselves in recent years, and in the opening weeks of that war, as they faced an existential threat under siege from the Russians. I was there in Kiev making a Four Corners program, which was essentially about the resilience of people preparing for total war, preparing to fight the Russians street by street. So it's the closest I've ever come to actually imagining what it would have been like to be in Australia in the Second World War, watching the Japanese army creeping towards Rabaul on the Kokoda track, or when Darwin was bombed, or when our bacon was saved by the US in the Battle of the Coral Sea, and to when 960,000 of us enlisted. So I tried to imagine if we would be as tough and resilient, we Australians, as the Ukrainians are, if we'd be as tough and resilient as our own ancestors. So they've been questions asked here today, and I guess a lot of this is why one wants to restore and revive the social licence of the Army. So we all want to get back into this discussion. I'm sure lots of you will have questions for Matt. I'll get the ball rolling. Grab the microphone. So tell me, what is the challenge for the War Memorial in this regard to engage the next generations, those who didn't have relatives, close relatives in either of the total wars that we fought?
I think it'll surprise you to know that we already do. People right now at the Australian War Memorial, whilst we're going through this major development, we're back at pre-COVID numbers. I'm getting 1 million visitors a year, 120,000 school children a year passing through these wonderful halls. I should also tell you, Charles Bean diorama, they're dioramas, it's Latin for through view, three-dimensional view. We're putting dioramas in the new galleries. The diorama we're making right now is about Dili Interfet Day 2, just to give you an idea of how we're keeping that storytelling alive. But I'm an optimist in this regard. I'm at the memorial every day. I speak with the visitors every day, whether they are, only about 11% of our visitors are from overseas, so the majority of our visitors are Australians. You'll stand at the last post ceremony tonight and you'll see school children from somewhere in Australia lay a wreath, pause and reflect. I have the honour of attending school wreath layings most mornings during school periods where kids from around Australia lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. We'll have a veteran in attendance. They will recite the ode. They will post a minute's silence. They will then go into the galleries and spend some time thinking about the nature of service and sacrifice as told here at the Australian War Memorial, and hopefully go home with a deeper sense of what it means, or of what young Australian men and women are prepared to fight and to die for.
Just off the back of what Peter Lowe was saying about too many flags, too many identities, I'm guessing that of the 1 million people that come, they're not all Anglo-Celtic.
Correct. And in fact, Brendan Nelson, my predecessor, famously told the story of some young girls he saw in the tomb of the unknown soldier one day. And they were wandering around, they both had hijabs on, and he just kindly went up to them and said, "So what brought you here today?" And they were recent immigrants to Australia, and he said, they said, "We've come here to understand what it means to be an Aussie." Right, so that's the story that we tell. Now, I'm not going to suggest for a second, and again, this is where I'll differ from Brendan. Brendan used to say every nation has a story. This is our story. Now, I don't think you can paint Australia's landscape in one paint stroke, one colour, one hue. But I tell you what, and I said this today, I had a group of politicians from East Timor who were here immediately prior to this chat. And I said, you can go to all of the cultural institutions across the lake and you can understand a little bit about Australia, our written word, our film, our sound, our democracy, what shapes us as a nation. But come here and I will show you and I will tell you what a young Australian is prepared to fight and die for. Because the average age on our Roll of Honour, 103,000 names, out of the 2 million women and men who have worn our nation's uniform, 103,000 are on our Roll of Honour, and the average age is 23. So that's the story we tell here, and that's something I'm very proud of. It's an insight into us that most people don't think. Now, I know I tell that story every day. I know the way in which we engage with our veterans and our visitors. It is a story. We will shoot. The whole reason we're doing this expansion is to create the space to tell the story of Afghanistan, Iraq, the Gulf, and 63 peacekeeping missions. But when people suddenly discover that Australians have been deployed on peacekeeping duties every single day, including today since 1947, that tells you a little bit about Australia and tells you that you should be bloody proud that young men and women are prepared to put on this nation's uniform and often go overseas defended only by a UN beret.
I'm just smiling at my technical incompetence because I've just managed to lose the page with all the questions. Please send a technical person up just to fix that iPad because there were some good questions on that. Also, there'll be some good ones from the audience, I've no doubt. But, I mean, is it getting more difficult from what you're suggesting, the answer to this is no, but is it getting more difficult as the nature of the population changes? So many Australians, thank you very much, so many Australians actually born in other countries. I take the point about the two women, the hijab, wandering around trying to work out what it is to be Australian, but do you think that's a general thing or is that a kind of one-off story?
No, I think people hear about this place. It's one of the most visited places. 1 in 4 people who come to Canberra to come here. There's a fun fact for you. I'll need to remember that for send estimates. But the point is, people do come here in part to, well, even the development of the memorial, what we're doing to ensure that we continue to be relevant in a place of story, because I don't collect objects, I collect stories. In this place of story is make sure that, you know, we have a diversity advisory group. Part of the way in which we can tell the story of the Afghanistan galleries includes speaking to people who fled Afghanistan in August of 2021. That's what we're going to do, because the act that governs me says that I've got to tell the story of the causes, the conduct and the consequences of the wars and the warlike operations and peacekeeping operations in which we've been involved. So I can tell the story in a way of the affected populations, because that's the lived experience of the men and the women in this room, is they didn't operate in a vacuum. They went to another country and they served heroically in the nation's interest, and they came home, and the wholeness of that story should be told and will be told here in the gallery.
And I think we can agree that the War Memorial is very advanced in its thinking on this. Do you think that's spread across the country? Do you think that exists beyond these walls?
So the mission, when I came into this job, we didn't have a strategic plan. It might surprise you, Simon, that we didn't. We've been 80 years young and we didn't have a strategic plan. And when I went looking for them one Christmas, my first Christmas here, I found them all at the section level. Every section had a strategic plan, but the Australian War Memorial didn't, which was perhaps telling. But I think this idea that the mission of the memorial is to lead the nation's commemoration and understanding of the Australian experience of war. But the reason out there on a smaller screen at the moment, because of do not touch, people touched and it broke, the very large screen, is what we call places of pride. And I want to connect, what's the largest war memorial in the world? Here's a question for you. Ask a journo a question. What's the largest war memorial in the world?
I would guess it to be in Washington, D.C., but I don't know.
Anyone from the audience? No? No? Great Ocean Road. The Great Ocean Road is the largest war memorial in the world, built by veterans of the First World War, for veterans of the First World War.
Great answer.
Okay, so when I think to the places of pride, the fact that we are connected, it's determined in my daughter, and in terms of recruiting, I need to declare I've got a son who's first year at the academy, wants to go Army Infantry, and he's got 3 years to change his mind. I've got a daughter who's a RAFI. She's a young flying officer now, and up in Edinburgh, not in Edinburgh anymore, moving to Newcastle, and I've got a daughter who's in the Foreign Service, so I'm pretty proud of all of them. But, I guess I say that just because in the conversations I've had and the way in which this place has shaped and informed their worldview, when they travel, the reason I mentioned Meg driving across the Hay Plain, she sent me a photo today of the wheat silos painted up, just as an act of commemoration out there on the wheat belt. And I think I don't for a second, every town has a cenotaph, every town has an avenue of honour or a place of reflection, because the major wars that you spoke about touched everyone. That 960,000 means that in the Second World War, that if it wasn't your family, it was your next door neighbour, or certainly someone on your street was directly impacted by that war, and we should tell that story. And what I also know about wars is their intergenerational trauma that can result from it, and people are still affected by it. And I see it every night, and you'll see it tonight. Tonight we're telling the story of Percy Garrett, gunner Percy Garrett, born in Glenferrie in Victoria, who was killed in the Battle of Albert, an artilleryman. And if his family's there, I don't know if they are tonight, but the family will be profoundly affected by both the act of remembrance, but the loss to their family of someone they never knew. And war reverberates, war ripples, and it continues to affect us. And my job is to help this nation understand that, learn from it. And as Lord Gowrie VC, our Governor General in 1941, who opened this place, and he'd earned his VC in the Indian Army, said that when people leave this place, they should utter never again. That's the point of it. But it's also a place where we tell this nation's story, and it's one, as the dodgy bloke trying to run the place for a few years, I'm terribly proud of the men and women who are in this room. In fact, I need to do one thing just to really upset the Chief of Navy, is because I'm governed by an independent council, right? And the 3 service chiefs all sit on council. So General Stewart's one of my council members, and we had council meetings last week, and I know just how pleased the Chief of Navy will be to see a room full of green. just send that to
There's a few
her. There's
naval
enough. There
uniforms out there
There
that
is.
I've noticed.
Senior
Make sure you
service,
focus on those as well.
Yeah.
Look, you've got this family connection. Obviously, you've got a personal connection to the Army. You've got a family connection to the Army. What is the most, this has come in as a question, what's the most important thing we should change to strengthen the relationship between Army and society? Go beyond the War Memorial in your thinking here.
Well, I was interested in the question before about what does a soldier do to, almost reinstall that compact, and General Lay answered it very well. I would add another thing. It's the way in which you engage with the community when you're not in uniform as much as anything else. I mean, when you're posted to garrison towns and stuff, don't live in the garrison, live out, engage, get involved in local sport, get involved in local community, because my lived experience of the Australian Defence Force is you're all good humans. You're good people doing good things who have skills beyond the skill set or the Army, the ECN or whatever it's called these days that you have. My advice would be to continue to talk about where you've been, what you've done, because it's only on Anzac Day that they see you all, kitted up and with your decorations, your service, and your campaign medals and the like, and people then they'll engage with you. And of course, that's what wearing your medals on Anzac Day is. It's an invitation for people to come up and ask you about them. But beyond that, I want people to be proud of where you've been, what you've done. The humanitarian support that you've provided, the domestic. Just think. I mean, the Army doesn't exist to provide, defence aid to the civil power, but by God, we've been doing a lot of it, Peter, lately. And we're certainly the first port of call in a severe weather event anywhere up the east coast of Australia. But be proud of that and tell people about it. It's not what you exist, but because flexibility is one of these 10 principles of war, unless there are more these days. Turns out it's one of the 10 principles of running a war memorial too. But this idea that flexibility, what you have in uniform, you have out of uniform, and most importantly, our Australian Defence Force was drawn from society. It wasn't born in a test tube somewhere and was we created you. You came from society. You serve and protect society, our freedoms and our values, and you will go back. And I think that's that idea, the compact that you have with the the mums and dads of Australia, with your neighbours, is just be you in every facet of your life. Wear this uniform and this proudly celebrate the fact. Proudly tell people what you do for a living, because what you're doing every single day is putting service before self. And as a nation, we should be proud of it. As a community from which you're drawn, you should be proud of it.
I'm just going to ask the technical advice again, not because of anything I've done, but the thing is locked. There's a great question. I can just see the top line, so if we can get a hold of that question in a minute, that'd be fantastic. Look, you heard Peter Lay talking about the reputation of the ADF being damaged because of war crimes and unacceptable behaviour. You've had to grapple to some degree with that at the War Memorial. How do you gauge the extent to which that has damaged the idea of the call to arms?
So we're not... The Afghanistan galleries are coming, of course. Hopefully by Anzac Day next year, they'll all be done. And what we think is the development will be done by then. Now, if you want to go there, when the Brereton, in fact, in this building, the IGADF Afghanistan Inquiry Report, how could you not reference that in Afghanistan Gallery? Matt Anderson was on record back in November of 2021 when some journos doorstopped me at a book launch and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I think this is the right answer. I still think this is the right answer. And I said, whatever the truth is, whenever the truth's known, to take Peter's point, it's taking too long, but whatever the truth is, whenever that truth's known, we should tell it. Now, I said that, and show of hands whether you think that's the right thing to do, because some shock jocks in Sydney picked that up and said, and this is the quote, "Matt Anderson, remember that name. Matt Anderson is erecting a wall of shame at the Australian War Memorial, and I'm aiding and abetting the Taliban." So our phones kind of lit up after that one. And my son said, "Really, Dad? Why don't they like you very much?" And I said, "Mate, they don't know me." But
I can assure him.
Yeah,
but I get to know you.
Well, quite. But anyway, so the point being, that's what we've got to do. How do we? We've thought very deeply about this at the Australian War Memorial. But I guess the most important thing I can do for people's understanding of the Afghanistan experience over 20 years and 40,000 men and women of the Australian Defence Force is acknowledge the fact of the IGADF Afghanistan Inquiry Report. And then the other thing I want to do is I pulled a bit out of it, or even quote from it, that was going in the galleries, and because this has never been reported. And yep, it identifies 25 individuals that are the subject of further investigations. Of course, it also contained 191 findings and 143 recommendations, just to put those numbers out there. But what it also found was, and I quote, overwhelmingly the Special Operations Task Group served skillfully, effectively and courageously. And because of the nature of their duties, they suffered a disproportionate number of casualties, both wounded in action and killed in action. And a long tail of mental health issues continues to emerge. That's a quote, and that'll go in the galleries. And in the 1,490 square metres I've got on Afghanistan, I'll then tell the story of everything from train advisor assist to Rotary Elements to the Special Operations Task Group to the omelettes and everything in between. From Chinook helicopters with their ramp down to battle-damaged Bushmasters, Debbie, to LRPV 150s, and everything in between, to life in the valley, to more dioramas to actually explain what happened in the Shora Valley, and everything in between, because I want people to understand. I want to put the Brereton Report into context. And as a nation, we're acknowledging the fact of it, but it is part of it, not all of it. And my job is to tell all of it so that when people visit the Australian War Memorial, show of hands, those of you who served in Afghanistan, when you leave this place, you and your families will be proud of your service, just as I am. I had the honour of being our ambassador there for 18 months. And know this, right? Know this, that I had a 10th anniversary of First Mentoring Task Force here, and sort of to go off script slightly. This young guy asked me at the commemorative area during COVID 2 questions. And the first one was, did I think we'd left Afghanistan in a better place than we found it? Great question. And the second one was it worth it? 2 very, very healthy questions for a young man, as I've described, a young man with old eyes. My lived experience, 2015-16 in Afghanistan, as I travelled the country, and I had the honour to travel Afghanistan from the east, from Herat to Kunduz to Jalalabad and everywhere in between. And as I travelled, and I met with all of our like-mindeds, our partners, every meeting I went to, every Saturday morning, I had a meeting with the like-mindeds, NATO and the Five Eyes and others. And they wanted more Australians. When I travelled the country and met with the governors of all those provinces, they hoped for Australians to come back in number. And when I read the intelligence reports, we knew that our enemy feared the Redbeards and the Australians. So for me, and I said to this young man, I don't know what mission success looks like, but if the enemy feared us, if our coalition revered us, and the people who were there to train, advise and assist wanted more of us, that sounds like mission success to me. And that's the story we'll tell in the galleries. We'll acknowledge the fact of Brereton because we have to. Because as you know, in the closeout report, the government's closeout report, they said the IG-ADF Afghanistan inquiry report has had and will continue to have a profound impact on the ADF. My job is just to put it into context in the Afghanistan galleries. And that's what I'm committed to do.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily trying to draw you into that long answer, but it was a brilliant long answer.
Thanks.
I've thought
about it.
I might add, but the question was, did it damage the army?
Yeah, look, yeah. No, because I think if that's all people know about it, then of course it would. My job is to ensure that's not what people know about. They need to know about the cause of the conduct and the consequences of our longest war, what we did, why we went in. I mean, the first picture you see when you walk into Afghanistan galleries will be 9/11, all right? And of course, we had mine clearers, wonderful sappers sort of clearing landmines on on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border before then. But if that's all people know, then it will damage the reputation. But my determination here is to tell the story of 40,000 people in Afghanistan over 20 years. And I think the reputation of the ADF as both war fighters and sort of warrior diplomats should be enhanced.
Here's a great question that I was trying to find.
I just made that term up, by the way.
That I was trying to find earlier. How do we make ADF values relevant for Gen Y and Gen X when it's communicated by Gen X and baby boomers? In society, age often represents wisdom. But if collective ADF cultural identity is so different to the shared experiences of senior commanders, how can we market a prospective career?
So it's curious to talk about values. One of the first decisions I took we were talking about the development and what goes under the oculus out here was we put in the 15 values that are in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I don't know if any of you have looked at the stained glass windows in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, overlooking the Hall of Memory, overlooking the tomb. But the people who, Charles Bean, John Trelaw, thought, how can we distill, and it's a way of allowing history to inform the future. But what did we learn about ourselves in that maelstrom of the First World War, where 416,000 Australians enlisted in the First World War, and 60,000 were wounded? By the way, another fun fact, between the census in 1919 and the census in 1932, 13 years, we lost another 29,000 veterans. Okay, so how do we make sense of that impact on our society that reverberates to this day? And they broke it down, you know, it's an exam question, 15 words or less, what was the impact of the First World War on Australia? And they broke it down to the 5, what did it reveal about us as a nation and our character? And they found that the 5 fighting qualities were coolness, control, audacity, endurance, and decision. Right? The 5 fighting qualities. What did we learn about? We're a young nation. What did we learn about ourselves as a young country? And this is to your point. We want our kids to be resourceful. We want them to be devoted. We want them to be curious. We want them to be independent. And we want them to tell the truth. We want to be candid. The 5 social qualities. And then as a society, what are the 5 things we thought about ourselves as a society? And they're things like ancestry, remembering where you come from, being loyal, being the importance of comradeship, as we called it at the time. But most importantly for me, one of those values, and it's in bronze out there now, and brass out there, is patriotism. You know, be proud of the nation that we come from, be proud of this nation that people choose to come to and call home. And I think those, whilst they were conceived in 1918 but weren't erected until 1941, the nation should use those as our North Star. I take every cadet from the Australian Defence Force Academy or the Royal Military College, drag them into if they happen to stumble upon me by bad luck in the galleries, and I drag them into the Hall of Memory and say, choose one. Any one. There is no wrong answer, but choose one and make that your compass heading for the remainder of your careers, and the men and women that you lead and the men and women that you are led by will be richer for it. So I think they're relevant. They're as relevant today as they were when they were conceived, and they are relevant to Gen Z as they are to my grandfather, because they're time-honoured, they're time-tested, and they matter.
So what do you say to, let's say, a Gen Z person who thinks that patriotism is actually uncool? This is a problem we face in the modern world. You're in global internet world, you're playing war games, you're doing all sorts of stuff, you're connected to the world, you don't necessarily see yourself in the same way that previous generations did.
Yeah, I think patriotism is the thing that binds us. I think patriotism gives us a common purpose. I think patriotism is one of the things that will pull us through in times of adversity. I suspect that if they don't value patriotism, they haven't been to a place like most of the people with campaign ribbons on, where it's fundamentally broken down and there's no national or social cohesion. I think you just remind people of the ties that bind, and that's what this place should do. It should look to tell the stories of those things. You know, you point about too many flags, the ties that bind.
I'm going to go out to the audience. Anyone with questions out there? Yes, there are. Very good.
Sir, leading Seaman Crowther from the Chief of Navy's office, by the way.
Oh, there you go. Good. Well, so, tell Mark I said hi.
Absolutely. Given Sir's comment about too many flags, I'd like your opinion, given that your job, being blessed by being surrounded every day by all of this military culture and history, do you think Defence's example of an integrated multiculturalism, being that once you're in, very clearly you're all green, is
it's
a good
eucalyptus,
example?
Actually.
Sorry?
It's eucalyptus, actually.
Oh, of course. Is a good example for society in general?
The flag bit is interesting because, Simon would know that we've had challenges. I have 6 flagpoles in front of the Australian War Memorial, 6 of them. And for a long, long time, we flew 6 Australian national flags. We now fly the Australian national flag at the head of march. Either way, you look at the Australian War Memorial, and we fly the naval ensign, the Air Force ensign, and the Indigenous flags as well, because they are flags of flags of national precedent under the Flag Act. So that's what we do. That's why we do it. But I think so. The point of the question, I'm just trying to think.
I was thinking about when he was asking that, I was thinking about the US Marines that seem to take this polyglot nation and turn it into you're just a Marine.
Yeah, well, we don't want people to just be Marines or just sailors, soldiers or aviators. We want them to be that and more. We want them to be Australians, I think, as much as anything else. You don't stop being an Australian when you pull on the nation's uniform. You don't stop being dare I say it also, you don't stop being a sailor when you take it off at the end of the day or at the end of your career. I think you'll be a sailor for life or a soldier or an aviator for life. But I genuinely think that service in whatever form it takes aids social cohesion. Anyone, and it's everyone in this room, who's put service before self should be celebrated. I don't know I'm quite answering your question, but I think very deeply about this. You know, the irony for me in my last 25 years in DFAT is I don't think I did a single course. They don't give you time off for training over there. They just throw you into the next job. But I've had a chance to think pretty deeply about what makes this nation the nation it is. It's not perfect, but that's because humans are involved. But we should, having seen the alternative, we should be very, very proud of this imperfect thing we call Australia, and redouble our efforts to protect it and enhance it in every way.
We've got a bit of a hard out here because there is a ceremony that we have to go to straight after this event. So I'm just going to ask everybody out there, sorry, no more questions, but I've got to know a little bit about Matt over the weekend, more today, but I reckon the War Memorial's in pretty good hands, frankly. Please give him a huge round of applause.